Right, colleagues, let's get settled down. We're into the last lap. Before we start the business, Morning Star raffle, the Bottle of Havana Club, was won by Denise Christie of the FBU, number 98. AXA Scotland raffle winners, first was Stuart Simpson, SPOA, and second was Richard McCready from the Co-op Party. So go and collect your prizes and enjoy. Right, moving into business, I'm going to call Mike Kirby to move Emergency Motion 5, Migrants Drowning in the Mediterranean, on behalf of the General Council. If I have a seconder or anybody else that wants into the debate, please make your way quickly to the front. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Good afternoon, Congress. Mike Kirby moving Emergency Motion 5 on behalf of the General Council. Congress, the current situation in the Mediterranean is deeply shocking. We've already heard motions and emergency motions at this Congress this week and in previous years.
Please settle down and show respect for the people at the rostrum. There's a lot of muttering going on. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We've already heard emergency motions this year and at previous Congresses on this issue, the approach to immigration. But the situation in the Mediterranean, where they're dragging bodies out of the sea day after day, thousands of innocent people dead, it simply beggars belief. The search and rescue vessels run by the Italian government that were previously saving 100,000 lives a year have been replaced by a smaller European operation that will only police European territorial waters rather than performing a full search and rescue function that the Italians previously provided throughout the Mediterranean. Already we've seen the devastating consequences, this policy with 1,500 people dead since the beginning of the year. And to that we add the 950 people who lost their lives off the coast of Libya a few nights ago. It's difficult to put into words the degree to which this situation is unacceptable. It is to the eternal shame of the UK government that they do not support the return to the full search and rescue function, a position that's indefensible in its inhumanity. Congress, it's essential that this search and rescue operation is reinstated as a matter of urgency, and we must try to prevent the needless deaths of men, women and children on Europe's doorstep. We must also seek to change the approach of the UK to immigration, creating a better, more humane system that recognises our responsibilities in the world. It's undeniably the case that the United Kingdom is not doing enough to provide refuge to people displaced by conflict. In Syria alone, close to 4 million refugees have fled since the beginning of the civil war in 2011. This is the largest refugee population currently under the care of the UN's refugee agency. But to date, the UK has only provided resettlement places for 143 Syrian refugees. This lack of action gives succour to the traffickers seeking to exploit people in desperate situations in pursuit of profit. We cannot allow these people to exploit our government's inaction on this issue. We must campaign for change and work for our partners in civil society to raise awareness on this issue. And a good starting point might be to participate in the joint appeal to the European Union to reinstate the search and rescue boats, which has been launched by Alan Smith MEP. We must, however, go further than this and raise awareness of the combination of factors that cause people to turn to traffickers in the first place. Congress, I move.
Thanks, Mike. Do we have a seconder?
Thank you, President. Jim Main from Glasgow Trades Council, second the motion. Really, I think Mike has said it all. The only thing I would want to say is that I think Congress would agree with me that we should condemn the comments of Katie Hopkins in terms of her reference to migrants as being vermin. That language is just unacceptable. And also, in terms of the motion that was passed yesterday, I think Mike's outlined it, the situation, what brings people to Dungavel is that journey that starts off in Syria or Libya, in terms of what the West has done in terms of the wars there. And that's the situation that brings people fleeing torture, fleeing persecution. So hopefully see everybody at the demonstration in Dungavel on the 30th of May.
Thank you, colleague. Anybody else went in? No? Okay, moving swiftly. General Council supporting. All those in favour? Anybody against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. Now call motion 33, additional support needs and local authority budget cuts to be moved by the EIS. If there's a seconder and any additional speakers, could you come to the front, please? Thank you.
Tommy Castles, EIS, moving motion 33. Colleagues, I was at an education meeting a few months ago, and at that meeting there was a parent there, and they explained in detail the difficulties they were having obtaining additional support for learning for one of the children. Now, the local authority involved did have a process to apply for additional help, additional support for learning. Unfortunately, and the parent went on to explain, it seemed that those processes were set in place to prevent parents obtaining that additional support for learning. They were time-consuming, they were overly bureaucratic, and they were very unhelpful. That should not be happening in our local authorities. My colleagues around the country, I have spoken to them. They work in early years, they work in primary, they work in secondary, and they say they have seen year on year heavy cuts to additional support for learning across all those sectors. Again, that should not be happening in our local authorities. This motion is about dealing with those two issues. Now, it's about maintaining and obtaining additional support for learning where it is needed. The motion does recognise we face budget cuts, but ASN provision should not be seen as an easy target, which it has been seen as an easy target for those budget cuts. This is about equality. It's about equality of opportunity for everyone. It's about an equality of opportunity for everyone to have a chance in the educational system to achieve their full potential. And ASN provision in all sectors is important for that. So, it also details some steps we like to see General Council follow. First, to ensure that all local authorities meet their statutory duties to provide the services and indeed to provide the information on those services. To investigate what is available and to investigate the uptake of advocacy and mediation services. To ensure that what is now the new Code of Practice for the Additional Support for Learning Act is made widely available and is in accessible formats. And finally, to campaign for improved ASN provision to achieve the aspirations of the Additional Support for Learning Act. I ask you to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, colleague.
President Congress, Susan Kennedy, Unison Scotland, seconding the motion. Only a decade ago, I felt proud to support pupils with additional support needs. Not only did I feel like I'd supported the child, but the teacher too. And a colleague of mine, I'm sure Pat Flanagan will concur with that. Today, this is sadly not the case. I feel ashamed that despite councils having statutory duties under the Additional Support Needs Scotland Act, the Scottish Government continue to make cuts to council budgets. Across the country, local authorities have made cuts to vital support posts in schools at a time when numbers of children recorded with additional support needs are increasing significantly, with around 20% of all pupils requiring support of some kind. Speech, language and communication needs are one of the biggest difficulties, with around 50% of children from deprived communities having problems. Children should be able to have their needs assessed and support put in place as early and quickly as possible, but too many face unacceptable delays and long waits with life-changing consequences. Once again, austerity is affecting the most vulnerable, and we must speak up on their behalf, for the children, the families and the workers affected. Dedicated staff across the range of services delivered to those with additional support needs do their best in difficult and increasingly stressful circumstances. That is why, in unison, our members in Glasgow stood firm last year and forced the City Council in Glasgow to withdraw proposals for all pupil support assistants to administer medications to pupils with health needs on the cheap. Our members, mainly low-paid women, took 17 weeks of action and won a better deal for them and better conditions and safeguards for them and the children they cared for. Unison has been represented on the advisory group updating Scottish guidelines on the administration of medications in schools, and that's due to be consulted on this summer. Please support this motion.
Thank you, colleague. Is there anybody else? No. Nobody else went in? Okay, moving to the vote. General Council supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. I'll now call motion 34, LGBT young people and progression from school to training, apprenticeships and further education, to be moved by the annual STUC LGBT Workers Conference. Can I also ask any seconders or any other additional speakers to come to the front, please? Thanks.
President, Congress, Stuart Whitlam-Monroe, STUC LGBT Committee. While we welcome the Wood Commission report, which focuses on strengthening links with employers, schools and colleges, it is a fact that LGBT young people, educational and employment issues are still being ignored in relation to the world at work. This is despite substantial evidence from Stonewall and others on the impact of the negative experiences in schools and colleges and how that can affect educational outcomes. The review highlighted the need for meaningful work experiences while still at school and access to colleges, programmes and modern apprenticeships. At our Fringe event, we heard very emotive speeches given by 3 very brave young people who have suffered from transphobic and homophobic bullying. This resulted in 2 of these young people dropping out of the high schools and instead attending colleges. Stonewall Schools report says that 1 in 3 LGBT young people changed their post-16 education plan as a result of homophobia and bullying, and trans persons' journey can be doubly as hard. We heard testimony from Matt telling us of the way his school failed to deal with his transitional journey, ignoring the way he identified in his career choices, and that this changed who he is as a result. In part, this is down to gender stereotyping. For instance, many young women, maths and science are not seen as cool, which can put a barrier to young people going into professions such as sciences and technology. Remember, Congress, it's not that long ago that young women weren't encouraged to enter certain professions. In conclusion, Congress, much more needs to be done to support LGBT young people, both in education and their transition to career work path. To this end, we need to carry out research on these issues faced by LGBT young people. Also, we need to produce materials for use by affiliated unions and highlight the issues faced by workers, particularly school leavers, and encourage the sharing of good practice, ensuring we tackle homophobia and transphobia in schools. I move.
Thank you, colleague. Seconder.
President, Congress, Pam Curry from the EIS to second the motion. Colleagues, as Stuart has said, we heard on Monday the first-hand experiences of young LGBT people in Scottish schools. These young people were 17 and 18. They're not talking about the experiences that some of us had 20 or 30 years ago. They're talking about experiences that are happening here and now and the scars that are left by homophobic and transphobic bullying. And as appalling as their experiences were, every single one of them said, I've got friends who had it worse. Some they knew personally, people who had not survived. And the Stonewall report into homophobic bullying in schools found that nearly 1 in 4 of the LGBT young people they surveyed reported that they had attempted suicide. Unsurprisingly, over 40% felt that they didn't achieve their full potential at school. Stuart's spoken about some of the issues in terms of the transition to work, the transition into apprenticeships for young LGBT people, and it's unfortunate that the Wood Review, which we do welcome, doesn't address any of those issues. There is an assumption, I work in further education, and there is an assumption often in FE that homophobic and transphobic bullying stop at the school gates, that magically when young people turn 16, somehow these issues disappear, and they don't. Young people face the same problems in college classes as they do in the schools that they have just left, particularly those college classes that are aimed at vulnerable young people, that are aimed at school leavers with few or no qualifications. For trans young people, the situation is worse. Many trans young people come to college looking to have a fresh start, enrolling in their gender identity, only then to be outed by people who knew them at school. Colleges do often deal with these issues better than schools are. They often are better set up to challenge these issues in schools, partly because these young people have the support of mature students who perhaps are themselves out in the LGBT community. But we are facing real issues as austerity cuts bite and affect support and guidance services in colleges. Stuart mentioned the issues in terms of gender stereotyping, and I think there are real issues in terms of the narrow focus of the Woods Review on STEM. Further education is not just about giving young people training for the workplace. It's also about rebuilding confidence, particularly for young people. Like one of our speakers on Monday said, her confidence at school as a result of homophobic bullying had reached lower than rock bottom. These are the young people who are coming into colleges whose lives we need to change. And the cuts are affecting young people directly, because what we are seeing are cuts to the soft targets, the courses that are perceived as being LGBT friendly, courses like creative industries, which are facing huge cuts. We need colleges to be safe spaces and good learning environments for our most vulnerable young learners. We welcome the Woods Review, but we feel there are gaps there in the equality issues, and I second the motion.
Thank you, colleague. Anybody else? Okay, moving to the vote. General Council supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. When I go out for dinner with my girls, I'll be saying to them, all those in favour? I'll now call motion 35, Gender Within Modern Apprenticeships, to be removed by the annual STUC Youth Conference. And if there's a seconder and anybody else wishes to make contributions, please come to the front.
Samantha Ritchie, STUC Youth Committee. Modern apprenticeships is a great way for young people to get into employment and effectively earn and learn on the job. In 2010, the economic recession was really beginning to hit in and attack young people. Youth unemployment reached record levels. Over 1 million young people were unemployed, not in training or education. The figure now stands at just over 700,000. But we need to raise questions as a union movement over the sustainability and the quality of the jobs created. For example, 0 hours contracts, or the fact that young people aged 21 and under are paid less than people who are over 22 for doing the exact same job. They still have the same bills to pay, they still have the same job to do, so we should be paying them equally in this society. Not only do they attack us in work, but they also attack us out of work by the draconian Tory proposals such as workfare. When we look at year-on-year targets that the Scottish Government's put forward to do with modern apprenticeships, it's around 30,000 by 2018 is what they're proposing. But let me be clear, and let the Youth Committee be clear, these apprenticeships have got to be sustainable and they've got to pay decent wages for a decent day's work. I spoke to a young woman recently who works for an organisation in Saltcoats. Her employer takes normal jobs. I think there's around 12 of the jobs that they've turned into modern apprenticeship, and they pay around £2.73 an hour. Employer was also paid around £400 from the Scottish Government to take on a modern apprenticeship. One representative from the job centre was sent down to their workplace to assess what was going on and if they were meeting the criteria. And unfortunately they weren't, but the job centre told the employer, we'll just turn a blind eye to this because we know you're taking on a modern apprenticeship. But I'm sure when it comes to the Scottish Government statistics, that will go towards it. We look at modern apprenticeships and the lack of young women in areas such as biotechnology, bus coach engineering and vehicle parts. Last year, there was no young women in these apprenticeships, but young women still continue to dominate areas such as hairdressing, beauty, children's learning and development and dental nursing. They're covering up the cracks but not dealing with the real issues, and that's the problem. There's a young member in Unite, she's an engineer, and when she started working as an apprenticeship for her employer, there was no facilities for young women in her workplace. She had to campaign to make sure that that was put in place, and when she did so, the employer had to pay around £5,000 a month for a porta cabin just for her to get changed until they made the reasonable adjustments in that workplace. Karl Marx said, "Social progress can only be measured by the social position of the female sex." We need to address the issues of inequality which exist in our society if we're going to progress. Please support this motion.
Thank you. Seconder.
President Congress, James Corey, Unison Scotland, supporting the motion. Comrades, Unison Scotland welcome the opportunity to support the motion, especially as it highlights the importance of adequate resources being made available to implement this crucial aspect of Scotland's youth employment strategy. In particular, we wholeheartedly agree with the assertion that more needs to be done to encourage women to consider and commence apprenticeships in underrepresented occupational sectors. But Congress, let's not lose sight of the fact that the issue of underrepresentation within apprenticeships covers much more than gender segregation. Indeed, a whole host of underrepresented groups experience disadvantage as they seek to enter the workplace. Let me give you some examples. A meagre 2% of current modern apprenticeships come from minority ethnic groups, despite making up some 6% of the population. Secondly, by the time they are 26, a young person with a declared or assessed disability is 4 times as likely to be unemployed as their non-disabled peer. And finally, 1 in 3 looked after children find themselves unemployed 9 months after leaving school. It is thus clear that any future strategy focusing on tackling inequality within apprenticeship programmes must consider not only gender imbalance issues, but the similar or even more complex challenges various underrepresented groups face in accessing and sustaining employment. Congress, as a prerequisite to tackling these inequalities, all school pupils need to be better prepared for employment and better informed in career choice. It is clear to our members in Unison, who are professionally qualified careers advisors, that this will only be achieved by ensuring that all young people have made a well-informed choice before commencing any vocational pathway in their senior phase of schooling. Thus, when at the stage of considering, for example, the new foundation modern apprenticeships, adequate resources should be in place to ensure all school pupils have access to face-to-face advice and guidance on a one-to-one basis with a careers guidance professional. This will provide the crucial support young people need to integrate these experiences into their career management skills and their personal future plans. Congress, this position is also supported by the 2013 Unison-funded research by Edinburgh Uni academics Semple and Howison. These highly respected academics in the fields of career guidance considered the impact of career websites on other career support on over 1,000 pupils in 4th year in Scotland. The research concluded that whilst careers websites are and will continue to be an essential and valuable component of careers information, advice and guidance provision, they have a limited impact on young people's career management skills compared with other approaches. Indeed, the academics concluded that face-to-face approaches on a one-to-one basis represent a better use of public resources. Careers guidance professionals are highly ideally placed to highlight the benefits of workplace learning as a respected career option and alternative to university. Congress, in supporting the motion, we need to all take on board the conclusions of Semple and Howison research.
Wind up.
Unison believe our career professionals in STS have a fundamental partnership role to play. Support the motion.
Thank you.
Harry Frew, Union of Construction, Allied Trades and Technicians, up to support the motion. Colleagues, the motion mentions the number of apprentices, which is the Scottish Government's target, talks about 30,000 apprentices by 2020. I can tell you that, the motion, as it gets further down, talks about not enough women in construction and other industries, plumbing, electrical installation. And they're right, and it's a major problem, encouraging women into these industries. The biggest barrier most of the time is getting to convince the employers that it's a worthwhile thing to do. I can tell you, some time ago, in Glasgow City Building, we took on 12 women to put them through apprenticeships in carpentry and joinery. To make it even more difficult, they had to be single parents. And we had to go and meet with organisations like the DWP, the Inland Revenue, to make sure that their benefits and childcare and things like that were not affected. We got them in, we put them through the full apprenticeship, they completed their apprenticeship, done their skills test, and became joiners for the council. And that was a great achievement for them under the difficulties that they faced. But when the government talks about figures like this, I can tell you that in 2007, the number of apprentices that come into construction was 2,800 a year. 2014, it's 1,500. So there's a problem. And it happens in all these industries which are mentioned there, and how we should encourage women into construction. But one thing is clear, that the trade unions have got a role to play in this. And if the trade unions get involved, and the organisation that we're involved in is the Scottish Building Apprenticeship and Training Council, and having that role as the trade unions and the employers working together to bring people into the industry is an excellent opportunity to deal with the tasks that we're trying to do within this motion. So be clear that if you want to move things along, the trade unions have got a role to play, and every organisation should get themselves involved in it. Thank you.
Thanks, Harry. Is there anybody else? And I'm not moving straight to the vote. I'm going to ask Graham Smith to make a statement.
Thanks very much, President. As Congress might know, I recently took up a role on the board of Skills Development Scotland. And Samantha, the examples that you gave from the rostrum here suggest to me that there are some clear abuses of the Modern Apprenticeship Programme, and that's the responsibility of Skills Development Scotland. I'd be grateful if we could have a further discussion and enable me to raise these cases directly with SDS. Congress, the General Council is fully supportive of the sentiments expressed within this motion. I'd like to thank the Youth Conference delegation for putting it on the agenda today. The motion raises the important issue of gender balance within apprenticeships, a significant problem which perpetuates gender segregation in the labour market and the unacceptable and unjust gender pay gap. Apprenticeships play a key role in providing skills and training for young people within Scotland. However, the obsession of our politicians with the targets for modern apprenticeships is not helpful. In recent years, we've seen an auction of virtue over the number of apprenticeship places. It's necessary for the system to provide the real support young people need to achieve good quality training and jobs that equips them with the skills that offer the opportunity to make progress in their chosen career. A system which doggedly and rigidly pursues a target for political purposes at the expense of the individuals involved and without regard for the quality of the training opportunities that are produced and future job prospects is not the system we want to create. The motion welcomes the target of 30,000 new apprenticeships each year by 2020. And Congress, for the sake of accuracy and to ensure that a misrepresentation of the policy detail does not distract from the important issues raised in the motion, it's important to point out that the objective set by the Scottish Government is to have 30,000 apprenticeships within the system by 2020, which represents an increase of around 5,000 apprenticeships over the period. As you may recall, this was a policy first announced by the then First Minister Alex Salmond at our Congress in Dundee in 2014. Congress, the General Council commends the Youth Committee for all its work on the modern apprenticeships. The Youth Committee is right to continue to pursue the issue and is right to press for a proper strategy to be prepared by the Scottish Government, and the General Council is happy to work with it in support of this objective. Congress, the General Council asks you to support the motion. Thank you.
Okay, we go to the vote. As Graham has said, we're supporting the motion with the statement he's just given. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. I'm now going to call motion 36, University Governance, to be moved by UCU. If there's any seconder or anybody else wanting any debate, please come forward now.
Thank you, President. Congress. Dave Anderson, UCU Scotland, moving motion 36 on university governance. Before speaking directly to the substance of the motion, I wanted to speak about two of our branches and the disputes that one has entered and one may well be entering. In Dundee, where UCU members have responded to the threats of job cuts by balloting for action and have this week served notice of industrial action to take place within the next couple of weeks. And in Aberdeen, where management are seeking voluntary redundancies for now and have refused to rule out future compulsory redundancies if target numbers aren't reached. The local branch is moving to ballot to protect jobs, education and student learning. And I'm sure Congress would want to send support to both Dundee and Aberdeen branches in their struggle. And while there are differences in these disputes, the underlying reasons are similar. Poor decision makings at the highest level of our institutions, flawed strategic developments, and a vision of higher education that focuses on balance sheets and surpluses rather than learning, teaching and students. How universities are run is important not just for staff and students, but for the wide range of communities they serve. The proposals set out in the motion are modest, ensuring universities embrace democratic governance by having chairs of governing bodies elected by staff and students, forcing those governing bodies to address equality by imposing gender quotas on boards, and finally, having reserved places for trade union nominees on governing bodies. Now, given Scotland's proud history of fostering democratic intellect, of maintaining access to education based on ability to learn and not ability to pay, you may think university principals would recognise these proposals as sensible, progressive steps in defending higher education against marketisation and privatisation. I wish. Indeed, the reaction of principals could convince you that our university leaders have a different agenda. While they have agreed to address gender balance, don't ask them to commit to a timetable. And apparently, elected chairs would risk returning unsuitable individuals not up to the task. Trade union nominees sitting on governing bodies would, in their words, be damaging, undemocratic, and unbelievably that they would be counter to Nolan principles for standards in public life. University principals think that you, as trade union activists, are unable to act in the best interests of your employer as a whole and not be controlled by external forces that may give you a mandate. I sit in the court at the University of Glasgow, who are my employer, and I firmly believe that the interests of my members and the interests of the university as a whole are one and the same, that a well-run university run for the best interests of everybody is in the best interests of UCU members at Glasgow, and that applies in Glasgow and in every institution in the country. These proposals may be modest, but they are essential in halting the shift to a market-driven business model for education, which will do everything to protect the position of university leaders and do nothing to defend academic freedom, student support and community engagement. Please support the motion. I move.
Thanks, colleague. Seconder.
President Congress, Nick McKerle of EIS, seconding motion 36 on university governance. Congress, sometimes a figure, a statistic, even a picture can define a whole society. And this morning's news with the report on food banks, for many of us, define austerity Britain and austerity Scotland. Figures released by the Trussell Trust, you may have seen, shows that in Scotland, 1 year, claims in food banks have risen by 2/3, 65%. Now, you might think, have I got my speech mixed up? And what's that got to do with the governance of higher education in Scotland? Well, in Glasgow, 18,000 people had to claim from food banks last year, in 1 year, the highest in Scotland. In the same city, we have 3 universities and 3 university principals, all of whom were within a short bus journey of each other,
All of them have an annual salary of much more than the First Minister of Scotland. Well over £250,000 each they are paid. Such inequities in our society are also a defining factor of modern Britain and modern Scotland, unfortunately. But it is in the realms of higher education that such mega salaries are encouraged. It is as a direct result of the lack of proper governance in the public service of higher education, and this has allowed a growth of neoliberal ideology and managerialism. Such lack of control not only is reflected in a massive salary, but it encourages a lavish lifestyle of senior management, not incidentally funded by their salary. In Strathclyde University, one of the three in Glasgow, the principal had a house bought for him by the university of over £1 million in value, kitted out with furniture worth £300,000, hardly the Saturday visit to IKEA that many of us would have to do. In Glasgow Caledonian University, my own place of work, our principal, and this is not a mistake, our principal claimed £27,000 in 1 year in hotel bills. £27 a year in hotel bills, highest by far in the UK. Glasgow, and indeed Scotland, is not exceptional. But with the governance bill, we have the opportunity to change these things. Congress, we must keep pressure on the Scottish Government to enact this proposal so we can redefine our society and play a part in ending the iniquities of higher education. Support the motion.
Thank you, colleague. Is there anybody else?
Good afternoon, President, Congress. Davina Rankin, Unison Scotland, speaking in support of motion 36. In 2012-13, across the UK, universities spent £3.1 billion in building shiny projects, and in Scotland we spent £377 million. That same year, the workers received a pay rise of 1%, where on average our principals received an increase of 3.3%, with one principal in Scotland receiving a modest, to use her words, increase of £25,000. You may wonder why these statistics have to do with university governance. Well, at the moment, capital spending in universities continues to increase at a time when employers plead poverty. Senior management continues to increase at a time when our workers have seen their salary fall in real terms by 15%. Part of the problem is that university principals and governors are unrepresentative of the workers they seek to lead. The lack of diversity within the university governors is shocking. I am actually a staff governor, and I'm well used to being the only black person at meetings. And across Scotland, black women governors are almost absent from our courts. While university courts remain unrepresentative, they will continue to be disconnected from the workers who seek to govern, and will continue to prioritise capital spend and senior management pay and perks over workers' terms and conditions, and poverty pay will continue to shame our sector. Professor von Prondinski recognised the need for increased diversity, transparency and equality when he produced this review on university governance. It is shameful that the Scottish Government allowed our universities to bypass this recommendation and create their own code of governance. Congress, as was previously mentioned, they have made a vague commitment to increasing women members of courts, but haven't said when it would be done. They don't believe trade unions can actually contribute because we are, as you heard from Dave, controlled from external forces. So Congress, it's really important that the Scottish Government actually move and actually introduce legislation instead of talking about implementing legislation, as we need the recommendations to come in full. Please support, but can I also urge you to support our colleagues at both Aberdeen and Dundee universities whose jobs, pay, terms and conditions are all under threat, and they need your support more now than ever. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Okay, moving quickly to the vote. General Council are supporting. All those in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? That's carried. I'll now call motion 37, UK Government's Counter-Terrorism and Security Bill, to be moved by UCU. If there's a seconder and anybody else want any debate, come to the front now.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Congress. Douglas Chalmers, UCU Scotland. talking in favour of Motion 37, the UK Government's Counter-Terrorism and Security Bill. You may be aware of this, or you may be not, but I'm referring to a document which was passed into law and passed on for the Scottish Government also to implement in March of this year. You can download it from the internet. It's called the Prevent Duty Guidance. And this talks about the duty of various organisations, and I'm sure most of us will work for them, to have regard to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism. Now, this gives guidance which they expect to be carried out for all local authorities, for grant-aided schools, for further education, for higher education, for the NHS in Scotland, for prisons and for the police. In England, it's even more draconian. The Daily Telegraph, which is a paper I don't normally quote, complained in January that, quote, nursery school staff and registered childminders must report toddlers at risk of becoming terrorists under counter-terrorism measures proposed by the government. Even the Daily Telegraph said the idea was unworkable and somewhat heavy-handed, and they accused the government of treating teachers and carers as spies. Now, in the document, 31 pages, it outlines what the organisations mentioned are expected to do. There are 23 clauses dealing with universities, calls for staff training, IT policies and student programmes to combat what they see as terrorism. Universities are expected to have a senior point of contact for this. As far as we can work out in Glasgow Caledonian University, it's our senior Jani, or as we call them now, security staff, obviously. And so our combined unions, UCU, EIS, Unison and Unite, have a scheduled meeting arranged to discuss what he thinks he's going to get us to do. He used to be the local community policeman for the university, and I think he still thinks he's in this. But however, it's easier to laugh about this, about the way the British state thinks it can deal with threats, but it's totally counterproductive. They want our support staff, which is often the only contact with vulnerable students, to also monitor them for terrorist tendencies. Now, there's no way students will possibly trust our support staff if they are sitting there thinking, I wonder if they think I'm an extremist or involved in terrorism. They also want NUS reps to monitor students who may be potential terrorists in their view. So I'd like to be in that meeting where our Jani meets the full-timers from our Students' Association. They want information shared about our students. They want oversight of what they call sensitive or extremism-related research. They want prayer rooms and other faith-related facilities monitored. Now, although this has just arrived at a university near you, and a local authority, and a school, prison or hospital, the tragedy is it's been operated in England and hasn't worked. At the start of March this year, the previously most senior Muslim police officer with the Met, Dal Babu, a chief superintendent till 2013, said the government's so-called Prevent anti-terror strategy has become a toxic brand. And that's what this month they're expecting our members to take part in. And Dal Babu set up the National Association of Muslim Police Officers in a career that lasted 30 years. He said, many Muslims did not trust the Prevent strategy and many saw it as a form of spying. It costs 40 million, and as the case of the 3 schoolgirls who tried to go to Syria recently shows, even when it's practiced, it doesn't work. So the trade union movement has always opposed terrorism. It's our members who suffer from terrorist activities, but this isn't a serious way of tackling the problem. So please support this resolution and let's tackle this problem in a proper way. Thank you.
Thank you, colleague. Do you have a seconder? Somebody do it formally? Thank you. We'll go to the vote. General Council supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Congress has been asked to adopt the General Council's report on education, skills and learning, Chapter 5, pages 31 to 38. Does Congress agree the General Council report section on education, skills and learning? Thank you. We'll now take the motions from section 11 of the agenda, Parliament and Democracy. I'll now call amended motion 111, political priorities, to be moved by community. And then I'll call on South Lanarkshire and East Kilbride Trades Council to second. And if there's anybody else who wants to go into the debate, please make your way to the front now.
Thank you very much, President. Congress, Tom Donnelly, Community, moving motion 111, political priorities. Delegates, this election is a significant moment in history. What happens next for us and the whole of Britain is in Scotland's hands. What happens over the next few weeks will determine the outcome of a generation. What kind of life we will have in older age, what kind of lives will our children have moving forward. Over the last 5 years, we've had wages down £1,600 a year. 71,000 Scottish people depended on food banks compared to 7,500 4 years ago, and all driven in the name of austerity. That hasn't even done what it was set out to do, eliminate the deficit. Already Scotland's NHS is failing to keep up with the needs of patients. Jobs in the oil industry are under threat. Thousands of Scottish children are growing up in poverty. Congress, this isn't the Scotland I want. It isn't the Scotland my union wants, and it certainly isn't what Scotland wants. We want a fairer and more prosperous Scotland. We want families to reap the rewards of hard work, good jobs, fair wages and pensions worth working for. We want leading Scottish industries, accessible public services and an NHS with time to care. The Tories will strip away our living standards and make it impossible for us to fight back. Mr Cameron, don't you think we've noticed the hidden attacks you have in unions in your Tory manifesto that you're going to try to make it impossible for us to have a legal strike? Congress, the STUC must do all in its power to prevent this from becoming a reality. Whatever the outcome of the election, we need a financial structure across the UK that works for all. But most of all, it must work for the disadvantaged and the vulnerable. Already we know that the Tories are planning 12 billion cuts and a 1.5 billion cuts yearly to the Scottish Government grant. Congress, the General Council must work with all parties to ensure that they raise the money and are responsible for progressive manner. Wealth must be fairly distributed throughout the country. The retention of the 50p tax rate on earnings over £150,000, the introduction of a mansion tax on homes worth over £2 million, public sector procurement that supports business that pay the living wage, retention of the current rates of corporation tax, respect in work and in old age. That's the Scotland we want to see. Conference, I hope you support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, colleague. Seconder.
Very much, Chair. First of all, I'd like to, Phil McGarry, South Lanarkshire Trade Union Council, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to community for accepting our amendment. Can I say, Congress, the 6 bullet points contained in our amendment is, of course, already Congress policy. And it is the aim and objective of the People's Assembly, both nationally and here in Scotland, and I'm privileged to act as its chairperson. Now, time doesn't allow me to go through them point by point, but I'm rather intrigued. We listened to Ed Miliband's vision for government, and we also listened to the First Minister, and we know what Cameron, Osborne and Clegg's little helpers are all about. And they are trying to weasel out some of the decisions that they took to the detriment of working class folk. Well, I would say this. Some of the stuff that has been said in relation to the vision is good. But I would also say it's no good enough. Because, you know, in Labour's manifesto, and I just happen to have a copy, it says Britain can be better. Well, of course Britain can be better if they renationalise the railways. 73%, by the way, the general public said so, and they want public ownership of Britain's railways. They need to scrap the sanctions regime now and the future and end poverty, both child and food poverty. They need to scrap the anti-union laws and comply with ILO conventions to allow us the freedom to represent our members. They need to put an end to privatisation and invest in public services. But most of all, they need to end the draconian austerity measures that our people are suffering. Congress, we are in a class war. Austerity is working, but it's working for the super rich, the powerful, the elite, the bankers, hedge fund managers, the spivs and speculators, greedy corporations, the private landlords ripping off people with exorbitant rents, and the tax avoiders and invaders. Let's take the message into our communities. Ask where the candidates stand, irrespective of their colour of the rosettes, and publish the results. Name and shame them. Our Congress, the STUC, have set out their manifesto quite clearly, but our message here this afternoon is this: no to austerity and a just Scotland. Let's get through to our communities that we're privileged to serve and take that message loud and clear. Enough is enough. We're having no more of it. There is a better way, and there is an alternative. Let's use it. I second.
Thanks, Phil. Is there anybody else? Okay, moving to the vote. Oh, sorry, Graham. Oh, I'm trying to hurry and do it the whole. Graham Smith.
Yes, the priorities agreed in this room since Monday have set a positive, progressive trade union agenda for us to pursue in response to the outcome of the election and to do so as we look forward to the Scottish elections next year. As a Scottish trade union movement, we'll continue to fight for a more just, equal and fair society, not the increasingly unequal, divided society where modern-day plutocrats wield real power. An economy that provides decent job opportunities for all, not the feral capitalism where concentrated economic power persistently undermines the dignity of work. A strong social safety net to protect the living standards of society's most vulnerable people, not the systematic dismantling of hard-won benefits and the shameless demonising of the weak, defenceless that we witnessed under the callous brazen coalition of the rich. Now, while this Tory Lib Dem coalition has justifiably invoked the wrath of speakers across the 3 days of Congress, let's not forget the threat posed by the rancid UK Independence Party, a party, lest we forget, that won a Scottish seat in the European Parliament less than a year ago. This pathetic assortment of oddballs and bigots, hopelessly incapable of engaging in any manner of reasonable discourse that gleefully proposes policies which threaten not just the living standards, but the lives of some of Europe and the world's most vulnerable people. The appalling tragedy in the Mediterranean is the inevitable consequence of the growing influence of UKIP and their ilk. Isn't it shocking that we have to even make the case for search and rescue services for imperilled and exploited migrants? I don't know about you, but I witnessed the unedifying sight of the UKIP leader trying to justify his position on the Mediterranean tragedy this morning on the BBC. Not one ounce of compassion, just a litany of pathetic, erroneous excuses for their disgusting policies on migration. The more airtime the man gets, the more ridiculous and dangerous he appears. Any scapegoat will do: migrants, non-Christians, Scots, European bureaucrats. Behind the camel coat and posh accent, he's nothing more than a narrow-minded bigot. Now, he's bad enough, but the ultimate vacuity of the party is summed up in the personification of privileged buffoonery that is Scotland's UKIP MEP. What an utter embarrassment of a man, a cretinous toad and a paragon of ineptitude, and the sooner we're rid of this dangerous clown, the better. Pat, you mentioned the STUC should work with all parties, and I know you didn't mean UKIP, because that's just not going to happen. Congress, you've already highlighted what a Tory victory would do and what a disaster it would be. More ideologically driven cuts that will threaten the already weak recovery, policies such as the cut in inheritance tax, which will exacerbate inequality, and the ability of unions to protect the interests of our members will be further undermined. And while the Tory manifesto proposals to raise the thresholds for industrial action ballots has justifiably generated most attention, the proposal to legalise strike breaking is particularly pernicious. At a stroke, the Tories will render UK industrial relations toxic. Isn't it revealing how quickly they've moved from the big society to policies transparently designed to foster division? Division, the lifeblood of the Conservative Party. And it's especially frustrating to hear the claim repeated day and daily and rarely challenged in the media that the coalition is responsible for creating 2 million jobs. Now, isn't it interesting when in opposition politicians say that governments don't create jobs? Businesses do, but when they're in government they claim credit for every job announcement. The more jobs may have been created, the problem is that too many people are having to work 3 of them to make ends meet. And the fact that Tory ministers don't recognise this is another sign of the degree to which they're divorced from the day-to-day realities of the labour market. But Congress, we are not. Work and the interests of workers are our core concern. Who amongst us believes that the labour market is booming? We know the reality of falling wages and insecure work. Only yesterday we published the latest estimate of Scotland's full-time employment deficit. Nearly 500,000 Scottish citizens unable to find full-time jobs that they desire to make ends meet. Now that's the reality of the Scottish labour market in 2015. The Congress, after the election, the STUC will continue to fight for equality and an economic development strategy that puts people and communities first. We will not be threatened by the extremist right of the Tories and UKIP. Now, we've heard a lot from the right-wing press about the implications of a Labour SNP alliance at Westminster. What about the real coalition of chaos? The Tories and UKIP, a prospect that should strike fear into the heart of any Democrat. But Scotland's progressive political party should anticipate us holding them to account for the laudable and ambitious programmes we've heard from them this week. We've heard fine rhetoric this week, and I believe it to be sincere and well motivated. But post-election, we expect delivery. Labour and the SNP will be held to account. Congress, this election campaign has often been less than impressive. It's focused on the wrong issues, and there's been too much talk about post-election scenarios and too little talk about policy details. Opportunities as well as threats are bound to emerge as the policy vacuum will need to be filled. This is our role. Let's fill it with a forward-looking, fair and progressive programme we've agreed at this Congress this week. Congress, support the motion.
Thanks, Graham. Now I will call the vote. General Counsel is supporting with the statement that Graham's just given. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. I'll now call motion 112, Freedom of Information, to be moved by the NUJ. If there's a seconder and any other contributors, move to the front now, please.
Chair, Congress, Simon Barrow, National Union of Journalists Scotland, moving motion 112 on freedom of information. Congress, yesterday we passed a motion robustly defending freedom of expression against various legislative provisions which would have the effect of denying or limiting free speech and action by trade unionists, by peaceful protesters, and by others in public life. And this motion highlights the need for more vigilance and action and legislative reform on the important accompanying matter of freedom of information. Now, the Freedom of Information Act Scotland was passed by the Scottish Parliament in 2002, and it came into effect in 2005 and covers public authorities operating devolved powers here in Scotland. And the accompanying legislation for UK-wide authorities was passed in 2000 and also came into effect 10 years ago. Now, I hardly need to point out that transparency, the making available of information and the ability to challenge public bodies over the way they operate is vital to democracy and to the process of calling power to account and to pursuing the interests of working people and communities, which is what our trade union movement is in the business of doing. And this motion highlights the important gain that freedom of information represents. And I'm glad to say that the Scottish legislation is stronger in its definition of public interest than the UK one at the moment. But that indicates some unevenness as well and begins to point to some of the problems that need addressing, and that's what this motion is about. In particular, more and more non-government bodies, ranging from private companies to charities and religious groups, are actually involved in delivering public functions. And whatever you think of that, the provision in the Scottish Act to extend freedom of information to these bodies has in fact been underused, and it needs to be strengthened. And there are also gaps between the two legislative frameworks. For example, the Scottish components of the UK-wide Forestry Commission are subject to the 2000 Act rather than to our 2002 one, even though they fall within the remit of the Scottish Government. This motion, therefore, very clearly backs the demands of the Scottish Information Commissioner, whose post was, of course, created by the 2000 Act in three ways. First, it asked that freedom of information rights should be migrated wherever a body delivering a public function or service changes, so there's no sort of sneaking away round the back door. Secondly, bodies responsible for social housing and for private prisons in particular must be covered by freedom of information. Third, current legislation should be widened to cover all organisations delivering functions of a public nature. Congress, the authorities that we elect and the services we pay for must be truly public. They must not be allowed to hide in the shadows or make open scrutiny difficult, confusing or obscure for trade unionists and others. That's why this motion matters. I move.
Thank you, colleague. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. General Counsel supporting? Excuse me. All those in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Moving on to motion 113, Devolved Health and Safety for Scotland, to be moved by Midlothian Trade Union Council. If there's a seconder or any other speakers, come to the front, please.
President Congress, Rab Patterson, Midlothian Trade Union Council, moving motion 113. Sisters and brothers, the condemned government's sustained attacks on workers' health and safety, along with the continued austerity attacks on jobs and living standards, and the deregulation of health and safety legislation has taken a terrible toll on workers' health, safety and welfare. Political interference in the work of the Health and Safety Executive has included budget cuts, reduction on worker representation, and the appointment of a new Chief Executive Officer to commercialise the Health and Safety Executive. Official statistics show that the government's continued attacks on safety regulations and enforcement are having an effect. More of Britain's overloaded and underprotected workers are being injured or made ill by their work. The health and safety figures published on the 29th of October 2014 show that the number of people being injured or made ill through work is now rising, reversing a long-term downward trend. New cases of work-related illnesses and the number of self-reported injuries have both risen to well above the levels of 2010-2011. At the same time, enforcement action has fallen. The government's decision to reduce the number of inspections is giving rogue bosses free rein. It's both a human tragedy and a false economy to continue with 2 million people living with an illness caused by work and 600,000 new workplace injuries a year. The Health and Safety Executive has estimated that 28.2 million working days were lost due to work-related ill health or injury in 2013-14. The figures show that around 13,000 people a year die through work-related ill health. The number of new cases of self-reported work-related ill health has now risen to 535,000 a year. The attacks on the Health and Safety Executive must be reversed, and sufficient resources must be provided for the enforcement agency to do its work without political interference. Bad as the UK figures are, Scotland has suffered disproportionately from the 40% funding cuts imposed on the Health and Safety Executive. and from the ideological government and media attacks on workplace health and safety. Enforcement and prosecution in Scotland is falling behind the rest of the UK. The STUC submission to the Smith Commission called for Scotland to be given control over workplace health and safety. This proposal was included in all the early drafts of the Commission report, but was dropped from the final report. Devolution of powers over health and safety would have been an opportunity to turn the tide on the appalling record of unnecessary death and illness suffered by Scottish workers. Please support this motion and continue the campaign for powers over health and safety to be devolved to Holyrood.
Thank you, colleague. Seconder.
Johnson Green, UCAT, speaking in support of Resolution 113. Chair, delegate, visitors, as I mentioned on Monday, the Westminster Scottish Affairs Committee was set up to look into the horrendous rate of death and injury on Scottish construction sites. I also reported that the latest figures show that a 30% cut in site inspections in Scotland. UCAT ask your support for this motion so we can focus on what the real health issues for Scottish workers are. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other contributions? Okay, moving swiftly. General Council are supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Congress is asked to adopt the General Council's report on a Just Scotland, Chapter 2, pages 18 to 20. Does Congress agree the General Council report section on a Just Scotland? Thank you. Next one is to adopt the General Council's report on Government and Parliamentary Liaison, Chapter 7, pages 49 to 53. Do you agree to the General Council report section on Government and Parliamentary Liaison? Thank you. Okay. Mobile iPhone 4S with no case has been mistakenly picked up from the Alan McDougall exhibitor stall sometime today. Could delegates please check they have not picked up this one by mistake? Thank you. We'll now take motions from section 9 of the agenda, Equality and Social Justice. I'll call motion 82, Smith Commission Welfare, to be moved by PCS. Just give me a second. If there's a seconder or any other speakers wanting in the debate, please come to the front. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President and Conference. John McAnally, PCS. Well, for some years now, we've seen the harshest possible assault, harshest ever assault on the benefit system and on the lives of people who rely upon it. Now, as we know, austerity is nothing more than a fancy word to describe an unremitting class war conducted by the political and corporate elite against the interests of the overwhelming majority in society. And the attack on welfare, the attack on social security, is not just a consequence of this government's austerity policies, it's at the very core of their strategy. Because in order to cut and privatise the welfare state, including social security, in order to institutionalise inequality, which is their aim, they're conducting an unprecedented hate campaign to justify their barbaric policies based on the great lie that the poor are responsible for their own situation. A massive $18 billion has been cut from the benefits budget since 2010, and the Tories are now saying they want to cut a further $14 billion if re-elected. It's therefore never been more important for Scotland to have control over its welfare policy and spending, so we can attempt to protect the people of Scotland from the excesses of the UK government. Unfortunately, but unsurprisingly, the Smith Commission on Welfare proposes only limited devolution of UK welfare powers. By not devolving pensions and the benefits that comprise universal credit, the overwhelming majority of the UK benefit system remains under UK government control. And on top of this, the capping of benefits increases by the UK government will be retained, and thereby further entrenching poverty and inequality in Scotland. The benefits that are proposed for devolution make up just 15% of the total welfare budget. Nevertheless, that still gives the Scottish Government the power to make significant improvements. The Personal Independence Payment, or PIP, is one of the devolved benefits. The current PIP regulations are designed to remove entitlement from 25% of the current disability living allowance claimants. The STUC must campaign for these regulations to be amended in Scotland to ensure that there are no losers in the conversion from DLA to PIP. In addition, the administration of PIP is based on two private sector companies, Atos and Capita, performing all the medical assessments to determine entitlement. In PIP's short history, these contractors have allowed massive backlogs to develop, leading to thousands, literally thousands of these claimants having to wait up to 12 months to have their benefit condition assessed. This is just yet another example of the failure of the private sector in providing welfare services, and the STUC must be at the forefront of the campaign to end the use of private provision in the welfare system. Another private sector failure, of course, is the work programme, and it too must be scrapped under devolution. It has failed to meet its targets to get both job seeker allowance and employment services allowance claimants back into a job, while at the same time creaming off the profits from the easiest to help cases. Any cases that require real help and support are just parked and ignored, and then after 2 years sent back to the DWP, no nearer finding a job than when they were at the start. And it was an absolute disgrace that Duncan Smith, the Secretary for State, extended the programme contracts until 2017 in the full knowledge that it was to be a devolved power. Such hypocrisy makes a mockery of the Tories' supposed commitment to devolution. But it's important that our focus is not just in those areas of welfare that are to be devolved. I believe we must continue to campaign for a fair and decent social security system whether devolved or not. The unacceptable elements of universal credit, such as a single household payment or the extension of conditionality and sanctions to those in work, must be opposed. The bedroom tax and the benefit cap must be scrapped. The work capability assessment for ESA has lost confidence of sick and disabled people. It must be replaced with a humane and fair alternative. And the vicious sanction regime that strips out of work of their benefits from anything between 4 and 3 years is an outrage in a society as rich as ours and must be abolished. PCS has set out a clear alternative to the government's welfare austerity policies. We campaign for a welfare state based on need, not on the moral judgments of the right-wing media and politicians. A welfare state that ensures everyone has a decent standard of living free from poverty, founded on a commitment to full employment, an end to low pay and exorbitant rents that leave people dependent on means-tested benefits. Conference, please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Formally? I think there's nobody else wanting in the debate. General Council supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Motion 84, tackling child poverty, to be moved by Usdaw. Unison to second, and if there's anybody else wanting in, come to the front. Thank you.
President Congress, Alison Stewart, Usdaw. The profound impact of child poverty on health and life chances of young people is well documented. 3-year-olds in households with incomes below £10,000 are 2.5 times more likely to suffer chronic illnesses than children in households with incomes above £52,000. And children living in low-income households are nearly 3 times more likely to suffer mental health problems. By the age of 5, children in poverty lag between 10 and 13 months behind their more affluent peers in their development. Even before they hang their coat on the peg on their first day at school, they are already at major disadvantage, simply because of the circumstances they were born in. Congress, we have all heard about the shocking growth in the use of food banks. In 2011, there were just one Trussell Trust food bank in Scotland. There are now 48 across 27 Scottish local authorities. And the Charity reports that a third of those using their food banks are children. To have so many children going hungry in Scotland in 2015 is nothing short of a disgrace. It is not inevitable, and it is possible to reduce child poverty. And there needs to be urgent action. It's not just a question of getting more parents into work, because you know that the majority of children living in poverty are in working households. But for many of those parents, the only work available is low paid and insecure. They are forced to juggle more than one job on zero or short hour contracts just to make ends meet. With in-work benefits being squeezed, the welfare safety net has been snatched away from low paid workers. We need the system to support them better. The fact is, with the cost of even a part-time nursery place in Scotland is now over £5,500 a year, for many parents, work simply doesn't pay. We need better childcare provisions and an end to inconsistency across local authorities. A study by the Family and Childcare Trust found that only 15% of local authorities in Scotland had enough childcare places for parents who work full-time. For us non-members in shops, distribution centres and factories across Scotland, shift work and weekend working are a norm. And the same is true for many of our colleagues in other sectors too. But there is very little flexibility in the childcare that is available for them. So even when they qualify for free childcare, it doesn't fit their needs. The result is that unless you have a family to help, they have to work fewer hours than they would like to, or are frozen out of the workforce entirely. The impact on their family finances is enormous. This isn't just about childcare provisions, of course, it's about working practices too. There's a vital role for us as trade unions to negotiating with employers for more family-friendly policies and hours, and fighting for a living wage and a better security of employment, so that work can become the route out of poverty for families that it ought to be. Congress, this is a deeply ingrained problem. It won't be solved overnight, but the entire Scottish trade union movement needs to stand together and make it perfectly clear that child poverty is not and never will be acceptable, and that it must be eradicated. Please support.
Thank you, colleague. Seconder.
Thank you. President Congress, Kate Ramsden from Unison Scotland, seconding this motion and welcoming the motion from USDA, and it has been really good to see how the issue of child poverty has been kept high on Congress agenda. In Unison, we highlighted as far back as 2010 that cuts and austerity would lead to a rise in the number of children in poverty, and we were right. We've continued to raise at every turn the shame of a society which allows 1 in 5 of our children to grow up poor, most of them, as you've heard, in families who have at least one parent in work, working for poverty pay. No doubt many of them are members. Others struggling under obscene cuts to welfare and a draconian sanctions policy, which has seen more and more families resort to food banks to eat. Whilst the richest 1,000 in the UK have seen their wealth increase by 190 billion, 190 billion, Congress, money that the rest of us can only dream of. That can't be right. What kind of country do we live in that allows children to go hungry when there's so much wealth around, that condemns children to poor health and shorter lifespans and to miss out on education and leisure opportunities, which will give them a chance to move out of poverty? What kind of government allows this kind of inequality to grow while their chums in the City of London, in banks and big businesses amass more and more riches for themselves? Eye-poppingly high incomes, then bonuses on top, and still they don't pay their taxes. Congress, the truth is that poverty could be eradicated tomorrow. It just needs the political will to do it. As a very wise man, the great Nelson Mandela, once said, poverty is not an accident. Like slavery and apartheid, it's man-made and can be removed by the actions of human beings. If money can be found to renew Trident, then money can be found to take children out of poverty. Heck, even a fraction of that 190 billion of the richest would go a long way to doing that. We know that STUC and affiliates have worked hard to highlight the scandal of low pay and poverty, to highlight the stark contrast between the excesses of the wealthy few and the many, many families who rely on food banks to eat. Yet still the message is only slowly getting through. The media have done too good a job for the coalition of demonising the poor and the vulnerable in creating an us and a them, a divide and rule. We have to redouble our efforts to get the message out there that this is about real people, real children, our children, to challenge the low-wage economy and a benefit system that fails our children, and to create a decent and fair society where no child has to grow up in poverty. Congress, please support this motion.
Thank you, colleague. Presuming there's nobody else wanting in, they're not down at the front, so we'll go to the vote. General Council supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? The gentleman at the back is doing all three. That's carried. Moving on to amended motion 85, food poverty, to be moved by South Lanarkshire and East Kilbride Trades Union Council and EIS of Scotland to second. If there's any other contributors, please come to the front now.
Thanks, President. Congress, John Keenan, South Lanarkshire and East Kilbride Trades Union Council, moving amended motion 85, food poverty. The Morning Star's headline this morning mentioned that over 1 million people are dependent on food banks from the Trussell Trust. That's not the only people who are using food banks. There's other food banks that we don't know about. Pete Kelly, the Poverty Alliance, said in Scotland, I think we've got 168 that we're aware of. There may well be others, but nevertheless, that's how big the problem is throughout the UK. The main reasons, obviously, for this have been addressed by the President, the General Secretary, and many, many speakers here during the week about poverty pay, the working poor, so I won't address my remarks to that. I'll contain my remarks to the second main reason why we have so many people using food banks, which is welfare reforms. And the speaker from PCS mentioned a number of the issues that I would probably touch on, so I'll leave them out. The brutal cuts to benefits, delays in payments, reductions in real terms to job seekers allowance and employment support allowance, sanctions, tax credits, child benefit, all been cut. The sanctions are the number of the sanctions based on the Freedom of Information and DWP figures show that between October 2012 and September 2014 there was 1,562,893 sanctions for job seekers alone. For employment support allowance, people with mental health problems are getting sanctioned at the rate of 100 a day, and 60% of sanctions and employment support allowance are with people who have mental health problems. Congress, 500,000 people in Scotland are living in severe poverty, with child poverty increasing relentlessly. There is now research from a number of academics and professional organisations, and the general consensus is the government's cuts in welfare have caused the rise in the dependence on food banks. These savage cuts in welfare have caused huge suffering, cost lives, destitution, and done nothing to address inequality. Sanctions cause significant hardship, and no one should be left with no income at all. At least people should be able to eat and feed themselves and heat their homes. I want to quickly run through some of the benefits that have been affected. Job seekers allowance and ISA, now 7 waiting days before you get the benefit. Employment support allowance as from the 31st of March. If there's a decision against you, you need to have a new medical condition or a deterioration of an existing condition before you can reclaim the benefit. EE nationals, if they don't retain their worker status after 91 days, they lose their job seekers allowance. Unless they can show they've got genuine prospects of work, then they lose the right to reside. Obviously, that means they don't have any income, they don't have any housing benefit, again, creating a bigger demand for food parcels. The new pension freedom, so-called, by the government, introduced on April the 6th, means that people of pension credit age, as far as a guaranteed credit, will not, and the DWP have moved on this already, be able to qualify if they've got a pension pot above £16,000. So The logic of that is MD over 55 who's got a pension pot and they need income-based benefits. Well, I think that's the direction if the Tories are re-elected. As far as that was mentioned by the previous speaker in motion 82, universal credit, the great new panacea for all our ills, by Ian Duncan Smith, who, by the way, is now calling zero-hour contracts flexible contracts. Well, we don't have to worry about that any longer. The universal credit, it's paid 5 weeks in arrears, generally must be done online to get the benefit, and the housing benefit element is paid direct to the claimant. You can imagine the problems that will cause with rent arrears, housing associations and councils. And if the Tories are re-elected, we've heard about the cuts, unspecified, they intend to continue on the welfare agenda. If I could finish maybe by giving you some of the words of the people who have been representing over the last year and a half, suffering from these cuts. It tells you how they feel. For a year and a half, people have been asking us to make up food parcels that don't need heated. In other words, they don't have the money to heat the food. They also are telling us, when they go to the job centre and talk to someone, that's what they hoped. They wanted to explain if they were having trouble with understanding forms and they were computer literate. Now you're greeted by a security guard who demands to know your business, directed to a phone and threatened with a sanction. How will stripping away your dignity get you a job? How will not being able to wash, have a hot shower, pay your bus fare help you get a job? I'm going to finish very briefly by asking the General Council, when they have their strategy day in May, to consider what support this movement can give to the food bank movement in Scotland. There's a part in the motion that asks obviously for employment rights and other issues. I would ask the General
John,
Council.
You've been here.
I would ask the Council to consider that further. Thank you.
Thank you. EIS to second.
President, Congress. Edith Swinley, EIS, seconding motions 85. This motion talks on food poverty and the number of families that have to use food banks, including working families. As a teacher, I want to focus on the reality of that situation for our children and the impact it has on their learning. We know that there are hungry children in our classrooms because they come to school every day without breakfast. And for far too many of them, the school lunch is the main meal, if not the only meal, that they will enjoy in a day. Too many families are considered to be well off and don't qualify for school meals. But with static wages and rising living costs, these parents cannot afford to pay for a school meal. And children come to school with meagre packed lunches, which cannot sustain them adequately through the day, and they lack proper nutrition. The EIS welcomed the initiative to provide free school meals for our primary 1 to primary 3 children, not least for the benefits to our children's health and the family budgets. But we hope that this initiative will not only be sustained, but it will be extended to include all the young people in our schools. Around 70% of families suffering from food poverty with children in primary education rely in some part on the food supplied by our schools, either through free school meals, breakfast clubs or after-school clubs. School holidays are now the problem, because a large number of children go hungry throughout the holidays, as more than a quarter of parents suffering from some form of food poverty have said they were unable to provide their children with the number of meals that they need every day. The impact of hunger on the educational attainment of our young people cannot be overestimated. Children who are hungry cannot concentrate. They're tired and disinterested in their lessons, not because they don't want some career in the future, but their focus is on where is their next meal coming from. And the evidence would show that their long-term chances are limited by the barriers that their inability to engage with their learning brings. The EIS believe it's unacceptable that we have hungry children in our schools. We believe that all young people deserve the chance to reach their potential. But the reality is that too many children across Scotland are coming to school hungry, and this is having a detrimental impact on their learning. Action is needed now to reduce the impact of poverty and provide all children with a fair chance to succeed. I would urge you to support this motion to end food poverty in Scotland, ensure that all of our children are healthy, well fed and achieving their potential.
Thank you, colleague. Is there anything else?
President, Congress, Sarah Collins, Unison Scotland, supporting motion 85. Congress, we all already know the statistics about food banks. We know that it's a national disgrace and a scandal, but it's a national disgrace and a scandal on our watch. We do need to continue to campaign against austerity, but we also need to ensure that the next government in Westminster and this current government in Holyrood finally end wage deductions and freezes, that they implement the living wage and end 0 hours contracts, and that they ensure a living rent and build affordable social housing. We need to work together in a coalition against TTIP, because food prices will increase and quality of food will decrease if TTIP's agreed. We need to fully support PCS members who are not only at the forefront of defending against the attacks on trade union rights, but whose members are also highlighting the link between benefit sanctions and the increase in food bank usage. And we need to call on the government to finance an alternative to food banks. Congress, let's support food banks, but let's not normalise them. Let's not lose our anger that they are a disgrace. We don't want to see the big society. We don't want food banks to be a mini welfare state. Let's support food banks only through the principle of solidarity, not through the Norwegian model of food redistribution centres, which is simply charity. Let's look at the Greek Solidarity for All model, where their pro bono health clinics have doctors and nurses working for solidarity and the principles of solidarity, not charity, where their food banks are called participative kitchens. People can come together, eat together and speak together. And where trade unions have approached food producers, olive oil producers, who now give 1 bottle per 1,000 produced in solidarity to local food banks. Let's do these things here, Congress. Galeano, who is the Uruguayan anti-capitalist author who died last week, was famously quoted as saying, "I don't believe in charity, I believe in solidarity. Charity is so vertical, it goes from the top to the bottom. Solidarity is horizontal, it respects the other person." Congress, we all know that these are our values as trade unionists, so let's apply them to our support for food banks. Please support the motion.
Thanks, Sarah. Right, there's the MDLs who are going to the vote. General Council are supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Okay, moving swiftly on. I want to call motion 86, young carers, to be moved by the SSTA. EIS to second. If there's any other contributors, please come to the front. Thank you.
President, Congress, Ward McCormick, SSTA, moving motion 86, young carers. Recent research estimates that there are between 80,000 and 120,000 young carers in Scotland. 29% of young adult carers have had to drop out of university or college due to the pressure of being a carer. Every year, 48 school days are affected due to caring duties. 26% of young adult carers in schools have experienced bullying due to being young carers. And about 49% of young adult carers leaving education have no positive destinations. Now, as a guidance teacher and myself, I find these statistics extremely worrying. I find it worrying that there are so many young carers in our schools that go unidentified. In 2004, there was the ASN legislation introduced, making it necessary for schools to provide additional support to pupils with any barriers to education. Colleagues, how can we as educators provide such support when we don't know that the barriers are there? And the problem doesn't end there. Beyond school, young adult carers in work miss about 17 days per year and have a further 79 days affected due to carer responsibilities. 45% of young adult carers report having mental health problems. Well, to sum up, research shows that young adult carers experience alarming difficulties in education and employment prospects, as well as in health and well-being. Being a young carer will seriously impact on educational attainment. They are not being properly identified and supported, which means they face barriers that have a real and lasting impact in their future. And we need to ensure that young adult carers are protected from excessive caring responsibilities and and able to put their energy into education, employment and training. We'd ask for improved identification of and support for young carers at the earliest stage, anti-bullying and mental health support for young adult carers, entitlement to education maintenance allowance. We must ensure that our young adult carers are not hindered in any way to provide a decent life for themselves. Colleagues, I urge you please support the motion.
Thank you. Seconder.
Congress President Darren Waplington from the NASUWT Scotland delighted to second this motion on young carers with the agreement of SSTA and the EIS. Congress, like child poverty, the too often hidden plight of young carers in 2015 is a stain on our democracy. Every child should have the right to a childhood. As a young carer without proper support, this right is too often taken away. This lack of support is then likely to entrench a cycle of poverty as the pressures on the young carer makes it extremely difficult for them to reach their full potential at school. Young carers and those they care for are further casualties of austerity Britain. When working in a pupil referral unit in London, a young carer educated me in their daily challenge just to get to school. They had to help an ill parent out of bed and dress them, get their younger siblings ready for school as well as themselves. They then often had no food in the home for breakfast, took their siblings to a primary school, which meant on a good day they were guaranteed to be 15 minutes late for school. They were then tired and hungry at school, and this cycle was repeated after school. These are not reasonable expectations to put on a child, and it is not an environment which gives a child the best chance of educational attainment, never mind the right to be a child. We therefore fully support this motion's call for greater coordinated, holistic support, including financial, emotional and educational support, to ensure young carers have the same life chances as their peers. Congress, I ask you to support the motion.
Thank you, colleague. Is there anything else? Okay. General Counsel supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. I'll now call amended motion 87, Stop Student Poverty, to be moved by the annual STUC Youth Conference, UCU to second, and if there's any other contributors, please come forward. Thank you.
Thanks, President. Hi, Congress. Moving amended motion 87, Stop Student Poverty. Ryan Boyle, Unison. This motion is something that the Youth Committee are extremely keen to pass, as many of us were fortunate enough to go through further and higher education, and it's something we want to see continued for future students to benefit from as we did. From my own personal experience, having come from a work-class background, I was regularly helped to pay household bills. I was happy to do this. It meant I was often worried about what I was going to do when my bursary and loan ended at the end of my studies. In my last year, I was naturally stressed out like any other fourth year, but it was compounded by the worry I felt about getting a job to cover the bills that still needed paid every month. My part-time job in a local supermarket just wasn't enough to cover it, and it was my bursary and loan that topped up paying the bills. Now, that's not to mention the discounts you get being a student with bills such as the council tax. I was lucky enough to get a part-time job, 30 hours, which I was able to get just a few months after my course ended. But again, I was extremely fortunate to, considering how many graduates struggle to find gainful employment after their studies. And I'm well aware that there are many students out there who are in a much more precarious position than I ever was. And it's them that we need to support in avoiding the trap of poverty. Last year, the NUS highlighted that many students in various universities around the country were setting up a food parcel scheme for students who couldn't keep up with the rising cost of living. And that's in addition, to others who had to be issued vouchers for 3 days emergency access to local food banks. On top of that, a study published by the Institute of Fiscal Studies found that students are 8.4 percentage points more likely to drop out of university within 2 years of starting their course, compared to those from the most advantaged backgrounds. That's despite having similar grades to their richer peers at the outset of their course. It's clear that students from poorer backgrounds are being failed.
In Scotland, the average Scottish Student Awards Agency student loan has increased by a massive 61% to just over £5,000, whilst the non-repayable grants and bursaries for university students from the poorest backgrounds have been cut by around 35%, meaning that poorer students are shackled by an ever-increasing amount of debt. This motion calls for the STUC General Council, in tandem with education unions and NUS Scotland, to call for significant investment in further education support, where that support is still based on an underfunded, outdated postcode lottery. We also call for an increased grants for the poorest higher education students, along with increases in support for all students, to ensure that the money they receive matches the rising cost of living that we're all facing, and that students from these poorer backgrounds are not put off from entering higher education in the first place. We also look for the continued opposition to both the introduction of undergraduate tuition fees and the charging of fees of up to £9,000 to students from the rest of the UK whilst they study here in Scotland. A fairer deal for postgraduate education is also what we'd like to see. It's still too often studying depends on your bank balance and not your talents. Lastly, we'd like to see a fair and coordinated funding system that incorporates SAS, the education maintenance allowance and hardship funds, to ensure students from poor backgrounds are not denied access to education and qualifications. Congress, I move.
Thank you, colleague. Seconder, UCU.
President, Congress, Janice Aitken, University and College Union, seconding Motion 87, Stop Student Poverty. UCU Scotland, as one of the aforementioned education unions, fully supports this STUC Youth Conference motion. Congress has already passed a motion about the effects of poverty on access to education. Education is the key that unlocks a world of opportunity. It shapes people's life chances. It opens up career prospects, further learning, as well as supporting people to live full and healthy lives. It's not just about the individual, though. Economic development and our vital public services, research, innovation and creativity are all built on education, learning and knowledge, most of it from post-16 education. Congress, we can't allow poverty and debt to lock people out of education. It's simply a huge waste of some of our brightest potential. It's also a huge waste for the country. The NUS has warned of the underfunding of the college bursary system because of the £7 million reduction in spending, £7 million reduction in spending for 2015-16. A crisis in bursary funding is on the cards for colleges, and student support funds are under enormous pressure. I have a colleague in UCU who works in student funding in the university where I work, and she's absolutely swamped by students applying to hardship funds. In our universities, while undergraduate tuition may be free, as we've just heard, in Scotland for Scottish domiciled students, it's not the whole story. And of course, students from England, Wales and Northern Ireland face £9,000 a year fees. And we have to keep fighting to ensure that that does not get introduced here for home students. Student borrowing in Scotland jumped by 69% for the last academic year to £430 million, the highest ever. The average student debt in Scotland is just over £5,000, with some students graduating with over £20,000 of debt. I have 2 kids at home who are pretty much in that situation. As NUS Scotland President Gordon Maloney has said, if students don't have enough money to live on, they'll be forced to choose between heating and eating, and quite often even choose between finishing their course or dropping out. Congress, please support this motion.
Thank you, colleague. I don't see anybody else, so I'm going to go to the vote. General Council supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's fine, that's carried. Thank you. And we're now going to call motion 88, Violence Against Women, to be moved by the FBU. If there's a seconder or additional speakers, please come to the front now.
Thank you, President. Congress, Denise Christie, FBU, moving motion 88, Violence Against Women. Congress, I'm proud that the FBU, which is a very very male-dominated union, has seen the importance of bringing forward a motion like this. It's vital the trade union movement not just highlights the devastating effects that violence against women has on women's inequality, but leads the way in tackling it. The disturbing stats are that domestic abuse accounts for 1/5 of all violent crime reported, and that domestic abuse has a higher rate of repeat victimisation than any other type of crime. While we acknowledge that men can also be subjected to this type of abuse, women overwhelmingly account for the vast majority of victims of not only domestic abuse, but also trafficking and sexual exploitation, stalking and harassment, female genital mutilation, forced marriages and honour killings. Not that there is any honour in killing a woman. It is sadly a gross failing in our modern society which blights the lives of tens of thousands of women and girls, and we have a vital role to play in combating this violence. There are a number of ways in which we can continue to emphasise the importance of our campaign to end violence against women, one of which is through information and awareness. My own union has just produced a good practice domestic violence policy to help our officials and raise this with fire and rescue services across the UK. And I would urge all unions to make this one of their priorities, as thousands of working hours are lost due to the effects of women suffering from abuse. The knock-on effect being that they are penalised by absent management policies. So this is a trade union movement. And it is great to hear on Monday's Equality and Award presentation that Leslie McCallum was instrumental in negotiating the first domestic violence policy in Scotland, and I pay tribute to her for doing that. Our movement needs to demand that local councils develop long-term and stable funding streams for local provision of domestic abuse services for women. And that means women's hostels and refuges and not unisex facilities. And our movement needs to develop and support challenging attitude campaigns such as Scottish Rape Crisis and White Ribbon Campaign in order to reduce the level of tolerance of violence against women. Attacks on women in Scotland are on the rise, Congress. We see it nearly every day in the media, that women have suffered violent assault, rape or even been murdered. And it sickens me that some attitudes still put the blame on the victim. She shouldn't have walked home alone. She shouldn't have worn that short skirt. She had too much to drink. She was flirting all night. Congress, attitudes need to change, conviction rates need to change, and the law needs to change to hold male perpetrators to account. And finally, Congress, I can't reiterate enough our movement's responsibility to support women in the workplace. I was at the Trade Union Coalition Fringe meeting on Monday, and we spoke about trade union movement getting back to basics, organising and representing. But what stood out for me was the contribution from our comrade from the Bakers Union. He spoke about action in the resolutions we vote for. It's easy to put up your hand, but it's harder to put up a fight. But fight we must do. So let's make that domestic violence policy a priority, engage with the STUC Women's Committee, who have many years of expertise and experience to support. Please support this motion. I move.
Thank you, colleagues. Seconder.
Helen Duddy, Unison Scotland, supporting Motion 88, Violence Against Women. Congress, President, I'm proud to stand here and give Unison's full support to this motion. My union has campaigned against violence against women for many years, developing workplace policies to support women experiencing domestic abuse. It is devastating to hear in news reports on an almost daily basis about women being assaulted, beaten, raped and murdered. On average, 2 women each week are killed by a current or former male partner. The figures are shocking, as the fact that too often the law doesn't effectively hold male perpetrators of violence to account. That is why it welcomes the Scottish Government strategy, Equally Safe, launched last year. Includes a comprehensive review of the justice system, including looking at the law on sexual offences. High-profile cases of historic sexual abuse across the UK in recent years have helped highlight major failings in securing justice for victims. This is an equalities issue, and we are very clear in unison that this is a gendered issue, while absolutely recognising that men and boys can also be the victims of violence. Our Women's Conference in February backed a motion about domestic violence being a gendered issue, praising the work of Zero Tolerance Project in Scotland and Everyday Sexism Project, which records women's daily experiences of sexism, assault and harassment. Of course, Unison also backed a successful campaign against page 3 in The Sun. We have helped highlight the effect of austerity cuts on women's services and the ways in which women are worst affected. Unison's General Secretary, Dave Prentice, in his speech to our Women's Conference this year, listed numerous ways that cuts impact on women, including that cuts in tax credits cost women 4 times as much as men, cuts to the childcare support cost women 7 times as much, and a child benefit freeze costs women 5 times as much. Sadly, we all know that financial dependency can be the factor in whether women feel able to leave a violent relationship. Meanwhile, women also bear the brunt of cuts to local government services, and organisations like Women's Aid and Rape Crisis are struggling to keep lifeline services open. Dave Prentice warned that we have become a society which has decided it cannot afford safe havens from violence and harassment for women and children.
Colleague, I need you to wind up.
Congress, please support.
Thank you. Colleague.
President, Congress, Sharon Edwards on behalf of PCS supporting Motion 88, Violence Against Women. In 2012, around 1.2 million women suffered domestic abuse. Over 400,000 women were sexually assaulted, 85,000 women were raped, and thousands more were stalked. The laws are changing, with stalking and threatening or abusive behaviour legislation in place. However, more needs to be done as a matter of urgency. The more our society becomes unequal, the inevitable disproportionate impact is on women and children. The views of society also need to change to stop the sexualisation of women and girls in our culture, the media and throughout social media. Social media has proven to be a dangerous tool for predators to harass their victims. Wide-ranging reform of legislation in Scotland is required to help protect and support our women and girls. Women are entitled to feel safe on our streets, yet sexual assaults and murders continue to happen. It's indeed a sad indictment of our society today that we're not safe. A review of legislation is vital to ensure perpetrators of violence against women and girls receive appropriate and swift justice. My own union, PCS, welcomes the Scottish Government's strategy, Equally Safe, and will be very interested to see how this work develops. Meanwhile, as a member of the STUC Women's Committee, I know that we will continue to campaign on the issue of violence against women and help ensure women's voices are heard loud and clear. To be clear, Congress, this isn't just a campaign for women. We need male trade unionists to campaign too. Please support.
Thank you, colleague.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, Conference. Elena Pires, Musicians Union, supporting Motion 38. I can't stress much more how important this motion is. I've been recently the victim of stalking, and I'm moving to Wales very soon to escape this. As I have no choice, I've had to make a very, very hard decision. I wanted to point out something else that hasn't been looked at, which is the exposure of people in the entertainment industry and musicians and actors included, because we are advertising ourselves on websites and Facebook and Twitter, and we are not we're not even worth considering if we don't have these things now. All I did was advertise a gig, and somebody contacted me through my website quite freely, and then it all happened. I could do absolutely nothing about it, apart from call the police. Now, I wanted to formally thank Police Scotland for handling my case so well and intervening and taking time with me. But a lot more needs to be done to prevent people from contacting guys and girls on their websites and Facebook just freely, because I was just advised to block them from my contacts. But they can get a new email address for free, they can get another SIM card for £5, and they can contact me again, and there's nothing to stop them apart from me reporting it again, and then maybe they'll go to jail. So many working hours have been spent avoiding all this and trying to overcome the difficulties and organising another move and finding another flat in Wales. So please support this motion and implement policies throughout the trade union movement to help us overcome the difficulties. Thank you.
Thank you, colleague. Is there anyone else?
Yes, Marion Hirsch, UCU. We've already heard a lot about the horrendous consequences of violence against women and the fact that it's totally unacceptable. Surprisingly, though, we haven't yet heard about violence which actually occurs in the workplace. And I haven't looked up the statistics, but I'm unfortunately certainly aware of cases. And we obviously need to tackle the whole range of violence. This is also something that benefits us all, because if we have a situation where women, sort of half the population are living in fear, it makes it much more difficult for us to organise and challenge other things, and it becomes almost a deliberate control mechanism. In UCU, we've been working with students against lab culture, which could very well be called rape culture, which basically trivializes women. And it's important to make these sorts of links, that just as physical and sexual violence aren't acceptable, verbal violence also isn't, and that trivialization of women very easily leads to violence. I think the other aspect of it, as in everything, is the importance of education and the role of education at all levels in changing attitudes and changing cultures as part of the fight against violence against women. And the last point, for a number of years, there's been a sort of organised campaigning period against violence against women in November. Obviously, we should support that, but equally, campaigning against violence against women is something we should be doing throughout the year. So I urge you to support the motion.
Thank you, colleague. I'm now going to go to the vote. General Council are supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Before I go on to the next motion, this was left downstairs, so if it's yours, come and get it. Okay? Right, I'm going to go on to motion 89, disability hate crime, to be moved by the STUC Disabled Workers Conference. But can I ask the movers and any seconders and any contributors to motion 90 to make their way down as well? Maybe stay for a couple of seconds. So, Disabled Workers Conference to move motion 89. If there's a seconder or any other contributors, make their way to the front as well, please. Thanks.
Ellen Davis, STUC Disabled Committee. President, Congress. Reported crimes against disabled people make very unhappy and uncomfortable reading. Charges have increased from 48 in 2010-11 to 158 2013-14. But we believe that many hate crimes are still going unreported. It is hard to comprehend that blind people will return their guide dogs to the association because their dogs are being attacked. It is difficult to comprehend how a wheelchair user can incur the wrath of a total stranger and being called a scrounger. Who in their right minds thinks it's acceptable for a group of people to surround a disabled man, shout abuse, hurl him to the ground, and then proceed to kick him? Conference, these abuses are common amongst disabled people. In the name of humanity and decency, we must put a stop to these nasty and vicious behaviour. But delegates, it's not always easy for disabled people to report incidents of verbal and physical abuse. As a society, we need not only tackle the problems, we need to provide the resources to assist disabled people to access justice. Delegates, the motion calls for a number of actions, including the coordination of a campaign to raise awareness of disabled hate crimes. Comrades, it is a sad indictment on our society that a motion such as this appears on our agenda. Let us all work together to rid our society of these behaviours and ensure that we can consign motions such as these to the dustbins of history. This motion is about equality and justice. That is all disabled people are asking. Please support. Congress, I move.
Thank you, colleagues. Do we have a seconder? Formally second, somebody? Thank you. I think there's no other contributions, so we'll go to the vote. General Council supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. I'm now going to call motion 90, but while the movers coming up to the rostrum, can the movers of composite Q covering motions 91, 92 and 114 and amendments stand up to racism, stand up to UKIP to be moved by annual STUC Black Workers Conference, make their way to the front along with any second or any additional speakers. I'll now take motion 90.
Jenny Douglas, STUC LGBT Workers Committee, moving motion 90, LGBT asylum. President Congress, 2 years ago, the charity group Unity LGBT gave a presentation on LGBT asylum seekers and the current UK process to the STUC LGBT Workers' Conference. They gave evidence to government committees on the UK Border Agency screening process, stating that LGBT asylum seekers and refugees have particular needs that are often not recognised by the current procedures. During the interview process, they're asked a series of questions, including details such as the age, date of birth and full name of their first partner. Congress, I sometimes struggle to remember my date of birth, never mind trying to remember somebody else's details. The person asking the asylum may have had to hide their sexual identity for many years, so will be unused to discussing information which in their own country can result in death. Their answers can be affected by fear, culture, religion, politics, language barriers, and difficulty in understanding what is being asked. The UK Border Agency rarely gathers information or evidence from LGBT organisations on the situation in the home country. One asylum seeker said, "I was refused 3 times. They thought it would be okay for me to be returned to Egypt." Congress, Egypt is one of the 10 worst countries in which to be LGBT. A trans asylum seeker commented, "The judge in my case told me to go to the Sandyford Clinic in Glasgow, where a doctor would assess if I was trans. The doctor told the judge that I was definitely trans, but the judge refused my case because he said that the doctor had only seen me once, so how on earth would he know?" Congress, let us look at the detention centres themselves. Many of those detained have been given little or no information and have no idea how long they'll be detained for. Male staff members are able to enter female rooms alone. Congress, this is highly inappropriate and traumatising for those who have experienced gender-based violence. Shockingly, some of those in detention centres suffer beatings and abuse, other forms of abuse within those centres. In 2010, the coalition government pledged, "We will stop the deportation of asylum seekers who have had to leave particular countries because of their sexual orientation." David Cameron promised that those Africans seeking asylum on the basis of sexual orientation and at real risk of persecution in their home countries would be allowed to stay in the UK. So, David, how come that in April 2015, 5 years on from your promise, a Nigerian gay rights activist called Aderonke Apata had her case refused and rejected after the judge ruled that she was pretending to be lesbian? Conference, how would you prove your sexuality? She was so desperate to prove her case that she submitted a private DVD and photographs of her sex life as evidence. The Home Office had argued that Miss Apata could not be gay as she had had children from a previous relationship. However, the judge did reject that, but Judge Bowers did agree that she could not be considered part of the particular social group known as lesbians. The worst aspect of this ruling is that now she has been publicly identified as lesbian. What will that mean if she is deported back to Nigeria? Well, at best, 14 years in prison. At worst, well, I think you can work that one out for yourselves. Congress, let's put an end to the degrading treatment of LGBT asylum seekers here in the UK and put an end to deportation to countries with homophobic laws. Let's end the UK's unproud history of a system that is a vehicle for transporting people back to abuse, torture, or ultimately death. And finally, let us as trade unionists make a pledge that we know we will keep, unlike Cameron and his false promises. Conference, I move.
Thanks, Jenny. Conference, I'm going to ask for indulgence. Time's marching on and we've still got some business to get through. If you can keep your contributions brief, and if your points have been made, would you mind no coming to the rostrum? I don't want to stifle debate, but time is marching on, and if the points have been made, it's kind of duplicating. What do you think? Quite happy? Thank you. I'll call a seconder of this motion. Thanks.
Pam Curry, EIS, and part of the social group known as lesbians, to second the motion. Colleagues, we have heard harrowing stories from LGBTI asylum seekers, who are some of the most vulnerable people in our society. People who have been harassed, abused and persecuted in their own countries, only to come and be treated as second-class citizens in Scotland. And colleagues, Jenny asked, how would you prove your own sexuality? Colleagues, imagine, I'm assuming that the majority of people in the room are straight. If you were a straight person in an overwhelmingly gay society, how would you prove that to a government? Do you look straight? Do you like doing straight things? Do you have children? Do you not have children? There are no right answers. And there are no right answers because this is a system that is born out of racism and homophobia. And as trade unionists, I think one of the important things that we can do is campaign for the powers over immigration and asylum to be devolved to Scotland so that we can close Dungaville and so that we can ensure all asylum seekers who come to our country are treated with dignity and with respect. I second.
Thank you, colleagues. Is there anything else in this debate? Okay, moving swiftly on to the vote. General Council supports. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Moving to call composite Q, covering motions 91, 92 and 114, an amendment, stand up to racism, stand up to UKIP, to be moved by annual STUC Black Workers Conference. Now, I've got listed Aberdeen's Trades Council are to second. The following affiliates are supporting Clydebank Trade Union Council, Communication Workers Union. That's all I've got, and that's all I'm going to take. Okay? Leslie, okay, see this how you're there. Your begging face.
Conference Chair, Satnamna Black Workers Conference. Standing to move composite motion Q, stand up to racism, stand up to UKIP. Conference, I've got my versatile iPad here, which serves as a secondary function. Conference, due to the hard work and sustained collaborative efforts of trade unions and organisations such as Unite Against Fascism, Hope Not Hate, Searchlight, along with many others, 2014 saw the decline of the far-right political groups such as the BNP, the SDL, the EDL and Britain First. But Conference, despite this, we still face a huge threat at the ballot box on May the 7th. A threat in the guise of UKIP. It's a very real threat in Scotland as well as the rest of the UK, because at the Euro elections last year, UKIP secured their first MEP in Scotland. Conference, UKIP's success is down to their divisive tactics, which centre on whipping up hysteria through, amongst others, anti-immigration rhetoric, which the right-wing populist media magnify, propagate and normalise. This has the effect of pulling the mainstream politics to the right and creating a race to the bottom on issues such as immigration, on welfare and equality. Conference, the sad fact is that the ordinary UKIP voter is probably a work colleague or a friend or even a family member. But UKIP policies are completely incompatible will all that the trade union movement stands for. So over and above the action called for within this composite, we all as individuals have a role in the coming weeks to stand up to UKIP. We have a role to educate all voters about UKIP and their politics of hate. We have a role to support and campaign for those candidates who are standing against UKIP. We have a role to expose UKIP's politicians for what they really are and what they really stand for, so that we can continue to kick all far-right politics out of our Scotland. Conference. No to racism, no to bigotry, no to UKIP. Please support this composite.
Okay, Aberdeen Trades Council to second.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Congress. I won't repeat any of the points that my colleague just made, important though they are. Sorry, I should have said Fiona Napier from Aberdeen Trades Union Council, seconding Composite Q. Aberdeen and ATUC has a tradition of anti-racist and anti-fascist activity, and that's an opposition that's still very much needed. You may not know, but Aberdeen has a National Front candidate standing in the general election this year. And we also have 2 National Front community councillors in office. There is absolutely no room for complacency when it comes to fighting the toxic and insidious message that's being pushed by the far-right parties, especially in times like this, in times of extended austerity. Like many people here today, probably, I was involved in campaigning during the referendum, a lot of knocking on doors, a lot of conversations. And so often the comments that were being made were fears over cuts to services and social provision, housing, work, health. And all too often, on the heels of those comments, would be a reference to all these incomers coming over here and putting pressure on our already cut services, or all these scroungers taking what wasn't due to them and what the hard-working taxpayers were putting into the economy. I think we've probably all heard variations of that message. There are a lot of people, and we've heard a lot about it during Congress over the last few days. There are a lot of people out there feeling vulnerable. They're at risk, feeling insecure in their employment or having no employment, and they're worrying about how they feed their families, how they're going to look after themselves and their families. Those fears are being stoked. We see it all the time, and it's sickening, by a right-wing sensationalist elements of the media, and they're being exploited by populist politicians, by UKIP most especially. As a result, our immigrant population, our unemployed, some of the most vulnerable in our society, they're the ones that are being scapegoated. Instead of putting the blame where it really lies, the austerity cuts, so unnecessary and so extreme that we've heard so much about over the last few days. I would just finish probably by saying that in the trade union movement, we really do have such an important role to play, because UKIP gets a large percent of its support from within the working classes. So we really have a job to do, and I would urge delegates to pass this motion unanimously.
Thank you, colleague. I'm going to call Clydebank Trade Union Council.
President, Congress, Janet Cassidy, Clydebank Trade Council. This is Tommy Morrison's speech, but I'm going to skip across it because we've not got the time. The decline of the far right within the UK, such as the BNP and EDL, will be welcomed by the Labour and trade union movement. But at the moment, we're seeing the far right vying for control to form a new political party. We have a common anti-Islam theme and play on the anti-Islamic sentiment perpetrated by the Tories, UKIP and their allies within the media. UKIP's policies favour the wealthy, the boss class, with Nigel Farage claiming he was the only politician keeping the flame of Thatcherism alive. 9 out of every £10 donated to UKIP are from ex-Tory donors. UKIP support anti-working class policies of anti-trade union legislation, deregulation and privatisation. But despite this, UKIP have unfortunately resonated with sections of working class voters. The Tories' go-home billboards placed outside passport offices in towns and cities across the UK, and the introduction of the regressive and restrictive immigration bill fuels the UKIP agenda. Immigrants are not to blame for the current austerity crisis. It's the bankers and financial speculators who gambled the UK's money and were then bailed by us, the taxpayer. With Nigel Farage saying he will stand down as leader if he does not win the South Thanet seat, and with Labour currently ahead of UKIP in the polls in this contest, such a result would send a strong message that the UK rejects UKIP's policies and would have the desired effect of weakening the party, as UKIP can be viewed as a one-man band, with the Tory defector, and let's be kind and call him uncharismatic, Mark Reckless, reported to be wanting the leadership if Farage fails. We need to continue to give full support to Hope Not Hate, Searchlight and Unite Against Fascism to counter the racist agenda. Support the composite.
Thanks, Janet. Call the CWU.
Terrible, weren't we, John Brown, President Congress from CWU, to support Composite Q. UKIP is pitching for votes from working class people at this forthcoming general election, yet a close inspection of its policies shows it is profoundly anti-worker and more interested in representing the interests of big business. It is vital that trade unions spread the truth about UKIP and show both members and non-members that its policies are out of step with the aims of working people and the trade union movement. Here are just some of the anti-worker policies from UKIP's last manifesto. Not had the chance to update it with the manifesto that came out last week, but here's stuff from 2010 and 2013. Abolish maternity leave rights for people who work in small firms and cut minimum maternity pay by more than half. Each employer to decide whether or not they offer parental leave. Scrap the European employment right to 4-week paid holiday and breaks in the working day. An end to most legislation concerning weekly working hours, holidays, overtime, redundancy and sick pay. Scrap most equality and diversity legislation. Reduce the scope of claims that can be brought before employment tribunals and prevent any unfair dismissal or discrimination cases being brought by employees with less than 2 years continuous employment. Cap compensation in discrimination cases, and in those cases where workers are sacked for taking action on health and safety, only occasional site inspections to check on health and safety, and fines and closures for unsafe workplaces, limited to cases that can be considered criminal. Less pay for staff in permanent contracts to reflect their greater employment protection, a flat rate tax that would benefit the well-off and hurt the poorest, and repeal the Agency Workers Directive. The UKIP 2010 manifesto has now been taken down from the UKIP website and publicly disowned by Nigel Farage. However, UKIP stood for election on this platform, and the policies show the kind of Britain they want to build if they had access to power. It's also worth noting the record of UKIP MPs in the European Parliament. In recent years, they have voted against measures in tax evasion and against youth guarantee scheme to give young unemployed people a guarantee to work. UKIP policies need to be placed under far greater scrutiny ahead of the general election. Otherwise, some people may vote for UKIP, believing it to be a vote against the political establishment without fully understanding the implications for their working lives. It's vital that the STUC and its affiliates get the message out about UKIP and need to vote to protect our rights at work. I support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. I don't think I've heard anyone speak that fast for a while. Right, straight to the vote. General Council. Leslie, I forgot about you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Which is difficult for me. Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Committee. Thanks, comrades. when I got my award, I spoke about one of my heroines, which was Mary Brookbanks. Another heroine of mine that has shaped my life is a lady called Rosa Parks. And in Alabama in 1955, she was charged under the Segregation Act for not standing up to give a white man a seat. Rosa always said at that point, I didn't stand up because I was tired. I was really tired. But she changed everything. It went into the civil rights movement, and she never ever thought, she wasn't someone that wanted to be a heroine. And when I was reading her life story, when the Ku Klux Klan came and torched her house, she used to say, oh, I wish I'd stood up, I wish I'd stood up. Why did I do this? Why have I put myself above the parapet? You know, all this problem. And then years later, when she spoke about it, she actually says, I was actually more frightened to do nothing. So that was a learning curve. And that's somebody that has shaped my life because she was so brave but didn't think that what she did would actually change the world. So what I'm up here about is don't get into your head that this UKIP is some sort of comical party that nobody will believe in. They'll never get into mainstream politics, or that we are a cultured country and we wouldn't believe in all this vile propaganda. Think back to what happened in Europe in the 20s and 30s, and they said exactly the same about a gentleman, I think his first name was Adolf, that you might bring to mind. So racism in itself is vile. Segregation is vile. And what I would like, propaganda is vile, but what I'd like to take away today and remember, when, I think this is how you pronounce his name, and apologise if it's not, when Pastor Niemöller came out of Dachau in Sachsen, he wrote a very great bit, a word that says, when they come for me, and you'll all know it, and you'll all have read it. He said, when they come for me. So that's very important that we as a movement, but we as individuals fight for this, because evil can only exist when good people choose to do nothing. So, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Leslie. I'm sorry. Right, I'm going to call for the vote. General Council support. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. I'm only going to take the listed speakers I have now because we really are running behind. We've had so many folk coming in debates. So I'm calling amended motion 93, Islamophobia, to be moved by the annual STUC Black Workers Conference.
President Congress, Sophie Taylor, STUC Black Worker Conference, moving amended motion 93, Islamophobia, and welcoming the amendment from the STUC Youth Conference. In the interest of time, President, I'm only going to talk about the summary of what I'm going to say, and all I'm going to say is that what the STUC Black Worker Conference suggested as actions are not the silver bullet, but a starting point to turn back the tide before they deteriorate to a point of no return. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Second. Thank you. Right, we're to the vote. General Council supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. I'm going as fast as I can, honest. Congress is asked to adopt the General Council's report on equality and social justice, Chapter 8, pages 54 to 69. Does Congress agree the General Council report section on equality and social justice? Let me finish first. Do you agree? Thank you, Mrs Murphy. Right, I'm going to call motion 81, Cumbernauld and Forsyth Unemployed Workers Centre, to be moved by Cumbernauld and Forsyth Trades Union Council. I'm going to make another call. Not here. It falls. That's one of the. Okay. Fairness at Work. Congress is asked to adopt the General Council's report on Fairness at Work, Chapter 6, pages 39 to 48. See, for once I was right. Does Congress agree the General Council report section on fairness at work? Thank you. Now we'll take the remaining emergency motion, and I call on Edinburgh Trades Council to move emergency motion number 4, Edinburgh TUC Support at Work project.
President Congress, Des Loughney, Edinburgh Trade Union Council, moving emergency motion 4 on the Edinburgh TUC Support at Work project. On the 13th of February 2015, as part of a deputation to the City of Edinburgh Council Economy Committee, the deputations complained that on the 10th of February, Edinburgh TUC had heard that council officials were recommending the termination of the funding of our Support at Work project. The officials thought that our project should continue to be funded, but they could not identify the resources. A trade union project was going to be a victim of austerity and the cuts. Our case for continued funding is based firmly on the City Council's policies of tackling poverty, including in-work poverty, and reducing inequality in the city. For 11 years, we had been a key part of the Council's strategy. Now the Council was being asked to reduce its commitment. Council officials were asking the Council to cut its Council's Labour SNP coalition to reduce its manifesto commitments. The Economy Committee was sufficiently disturbed by our points to immediately decide that funding be extended from the 31st of March to the 30th of June 2015. This will allow a period for the exploration of other funding options. Negotiations are taking place, and we think Congress support at this point in time might be very important in persuading the Council to retain its funding. STUC support in the past for our projects has been very important. We hope that we can rely on support at this time to resolve our current crisis. I ask Congress to support this emergency motion.
Thank you very much. Form a second. Thank you very much. And that, my dear, is the end of the motions. Oh, do I have to? I've been too good. General Council are supporting. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That now is carried. I now ask the Vice President to go up and do the vote of thanks.
Thanks, President. I'm sure you'll be glad to know that the finishing line's in sight, and it literally is. It's the finishing line there. We won't be too long, but obviously we're up here to give the vote of thanks, and there is a number of individuals and organisations that are duly deserving of that. So, first of all, I would like to thank South Ayrshire Council for the assistance given to the STUC, which allowed us to gather here at the Ayr Racecourse this week. The support and assistance from Council and its Provost, Helen Mooney, is much appreciated. Sharon Jardine, Events Manager, and in particular Colette Swain, Operational Manager, for their outstanding support and assistance in the run-up to and during Congress. A special thanks also to the catering staff at Ayr Racecourse, and especially for the STUC President's and General Council's dinner, which was held in the Marquee last night. And it was, what a night it was, June. Excellent. The speech from your daughter was very, very moving, very personal, very emotional, and it nearly had me in tears, but it was a very, very good evening. I'd also like to thank Alec of Tayside AV and his colleagues, Kevin and Clint, who have been with us throughout the Congress. Thank you very much for your contribution and hard work. Again, colleagues, our Standing Orders Committee, Mary Alexander, Martin Dorn, Wally Docherty and Dave Moxham, Secretary to the committee that keeps everything ticking over and hopefully keeps us in time. We're only a wee bit late, but we'll get there. So thank you to them. All our tellers and Alec Kennedy, Chief Teller, for providing us with all the information we need when you're coming back from breaks or whatever else, and making sure that that part of the situation runs very smoothly. Our scrutineers, again, and Vicky Grandin, our chief scrutineer. Louis, if he's one. Louis Flood, NUJI, who has assisted with Congress photographs and again has been here for the duration, so thanks very much, Louis. We'd like to give a special thank you to all our exhibitors who have been here, and I'm sure you've enjoyed going around and visiting them. To all the organisations who have held fringe meetings here in the venue. To all the staff in Western House Hotel and the various hotels in the area. Government ministers and all our guest speakers. Clap if you want. No, all right. Our international guests, the media, our signers, Andy Irvin and Leslie Trira, thank you very much. They've been non-stop, thank you. Our STUC staff, and in particular the staff through in the back room, who you probably don't see much of them, but they're working their little socks off continually with keeping the President and the whole situation ticking over smoothly. Our General Council colleagues, again, who have had meetings before and on occasions after the Congress itself, so thank you for their participation and assistance this week. And of course, the delegates yourselves. Without you, there would be no Congress to have in the first place. So thank you all. Thank you all very much for your contributions, your considerations when things have run a wee bit over time, but it's very much appreciated. Last but no means least, we come to June, our President. Most of you probably will know that June was elected in Dundee approximately a year ago as President. I then had the honour of being elected as Vice President. June, in her usual manner, came across to congratulate me. I obviously returned the compliment and congratulated her. She then went on to advise me quite clearly, now that you're a Vice President and I'm the President, I'm the boss. There has been, in the past 12 months, no challenge from the Vice President in that regard. I'm sure you'll appreciate the dilemma I found myself in the way that June has conducted the Congress. I've seen grown men nearly coming to tears, stopping everything, right, I'm off, the lights flashing and whatever else. But June, the past 12 months, you have carried out your duties to the highest manner. It's a great privilege for me to, on behalf of the General Council, to make this small presentation to you. I'd now like to call on Cathy Murphy to present flowers to June on behalf of the Congress delegates. Thank you.
Well, delegates, Lawrence kind of hinted that I was being a bit heavy-handed. That's a bit more polite than what Graham described me last night at the meal. He said I've been a bit brutal on occasions with you. So if you think I've been brutal, wait till next year. I've got them in a training course. But thank you for your patience. You have been really great when we've run over. Tried not to run over too much, and that's kind of why I was brutal. So you get away at a reasonable time. So thanks very much. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to all the staff in the centre. They've been there for us. The team have been there. Louis has been there. So from me, personally, a big thank you. A special big thank you to Harry Donaldson in the GMB for being there for me all year. The STUC for being there for me all year. I know I said it at the start, but I do really mean it from the bottom of my heart. So thank you all once again. I now formally close Congress 2015. and wishes all a very safe journey home. Thank you.